Welcome to Magical Aspirations, a podcast for magical people, where we aspire to gather all of the knowledge magic has to offer, a place to illuminate and demystify all things magical. Welcome to this week's episode. We are super excited to get started today. This is our last interview that we're doing in regards to our spiritual nutrition series. And we've got a lady here who I cannot even say enough about because she does something that a lot of people in today's society don't even realize is a thing. She's a death doula, and she is the owner of Rowan Grove End of Life Doula Services. Lori Vellutini, welcome to Magical Aspirations. It is such a true honor to have you here. I cannot give you enough credit for the bravery that you have for what you do. Let's go ahead and inform people, what is a death doula?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so very much. I am very honored to be here and talk about this sacred topic. So thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Well, a death doula, it's very basic. I'll give you the very basic definition first, and then we can kind of expand on that. So a death doula is basically a non-medical holistic practitioner that cares for the dying and their family, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So that's kind of like the basic definition, but that includes everything. So we kind of bridge the gap for hospice care. We hold space for people. We reinforce education. We kind of sort of just guide the entire journey for people at the end of life, and try to make it as beautiful a journey as we possibly can.
And kind of make it like a journey for people who are, I guess, of a non-religious aspect, who
Absolutely.
they have priests and they have reverends and things like that. You get to kind of help people be a little less fearful of the death process, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I serve all religions, all spiritual beliefs. It doesn't matter. You know, when it comes down to end of life, there are some things that are very common in all of that. So yeah, I'm able to support just about anybody. And it's a beautiful thing, really. It's an honor.
I really, really agree. One of the hills that I'm definitely going to die on is that our society does not prepare people in an adequate way for death at all. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about this topic is that I've said it before on the show, and I'm going to definitely, this is a horse that I will beat right to death. I'm a veterinary technician, and I've done that for about the last 12 years. The 10 years of that, though, was at two different very high volume emergency facilities. So a lot of the things that I saw, 40, 50, 60% of that, a lot of those animals already had 3 feet in the grave because we were essentially a triage center.
Right.
And the amount of people that seemed surprised that death was even an option, 12 years in, I'm still astounded by it. That, like, death is the single only inevitability that we have in this lifetime. And yet people get sprung with it, whether it's through their family or through their pets or whatever. They're surprised that death is the thing that's happening. And I think that we really do a disservice to the death process and to the grieving process.
Absolutely.
And that's really, it's really almost frustrating for me. So when we talk about death and spiritual nutrition, what comes to mind for you when we talk about stuff like that?
When we talk about death and spiritual nutrition, I would have to say that, exactly what you just said. We've become so disconnected to end of life as rather than, accepting it as a part of this whole journey that we're on. We've kind of disconnected from it and made it something separate that we don't think of until we absolutely have to. And I think incorporating more death positivity and and talking about it more, educating, that kind of thing, we can bring it back into and integrate it into our journeys. And I think that is like the most powerful thing that we can do. Rather than it kind of just being an afterthought or something that you have to deal with in a crisis situation. One of the things that we try to promote also as death doulas is that it's never too early to start planning your end of
Mm,
life.
mhm, mhm.
You know, you don't want to be caught at the end of life with no plan.
Right.
Especially, you're talking about pets and things like that. There's people living alone with just their pet.
Mhm.
You want to plan for that sort of thing, and it's never too early to do so because
Oh, absolutely.
the amount of time we have is not fixed. We're not guaranteed our next breath. We're not
Mhm.
guaranteed anything. So, even young people who 20s, 30s, you think that may be too young to start thinking about advanced directives and,
Mm.
living wills and things like that. But I'm here to tell you that it's not too early. We need to incorporating these things early on and thinking about it. Um,
I feel really deeply about that too, because it leaves so much you leave so much question behind, what's gonna happen after you go, or, like, after, for your pets, for your house, for your anything that is yours. It has over the process of, like, seeing, like, my grandparents pass away and, like, other family members and things like that pass, it's really made me start to question how I want my death handled. I'm in my early 30s, and when I tell people that, sometimes they give me this really strange look that they're like, "Why are you even thinking about that? Like,
mhm,
spit that out your mouth." And, like, but
mhm.
it's important to me that my family we come from a Catholic background, and, like, that is, while I respect that deeply because that's part of their faith and I never want to shit on that.
Right, right.
Um, but when it comes to me dying, there
Mhm.
better not be anything like Catholic associated with that, because, like, that's not who I am.
Right.
A family member of mine recently passed, and he had some very specific wishes for what he wanted done and not done. Most of those things were honored, but, like, one of the things that he said he didn't want was a eulogy. He was a
Mhm.
very humble man, and I think he felt like that fed into, like, the ego pride aspect of the things that he was trying to not take with him to the other side.
Awesome.
And that's not really something that was honored. And as I was listening, I mean, the people that spoke, they said wonderful, beautiful things. Like, they were wonderful things, but they were for the people that were still here.
Right.
And I know that a lot of the end of life process is about that. It's about the people that are still left behind, but we are still honoring the person that has gone.
Well,
And
it's
it's
funny that you mentioned that because that's something that's coming back um, into the mainstream is actually doing things like living wakes,
mm,
where we do the wake while the person is still alive. So
mm,
rather than
mm.
saving all of those wonderful, beautiful things you have to say about somebody and air them after they're gone, you get to air those things with the person and share them with them, and it makes that end of life even so much more beautiful. Telling somebody and recounting memories that you've had with them, the good, the bad, the funny. It kind of brings a better sense of closure, I think, in my opinion, than waiting
Oh,
till somebody is gone.
that gives me, like, deep, full body, like, the hair
Yeah,
is
me
standing
too,
up on
me
my
too.
arms.
While
Like,
I was saying it.
because not to go too much into his personal life, but, he
Mhm.
was someone who he was a very devout Catholic. And purgatory was a big fear of his. And so he spent a lot of his last days and weeks, asking for forgiveness and going to reconciliation and, like, all
Mhm.
of these things that, like, it just makes me wonder, as we're talking about this here, that maybe if did those people that stood up at his funeral, did they say those things to him?
Right,
Like, maybe he wouldn't have been so fearful of purgatory, because
right.
the people that spoke about him, they spoke about his selflessness and his love for others and his care, his mission work, all of these beautiful things that, like,
Exactly.
what if they had, maybe they did, and I deeply hope that they did, but maybe he wouldn't have been so fearful, and maybe he would have let go a little sooner,
And that's
you
also
know?
something that we do as end of life doulas is we go through people something that's called an end of life review.
Mm,
Usually, it's a very common thing for people when they're nearing their end of life to reflect back on their lives and kind of pick apart everything. what they could have done better, regrets they had, things that they, were not proud of, things they felt that they needed forgiveness for. So we
Mm,
kind of hold their hand and hold space for them and kind of walk them through that and listen to their stories and just be there and let them just really kind of verbally work out these things,
mm.
and that's also extremely helpful, extremely important.
Lori, that is so beautiful. Like I can't even. I'm like getting like shivers and chills, and I just.
It is. It's an incredibly, actually, you know what? And we, like you said, we kind of detach from death, but you know what? It's probably one of the most beautiful things, parts of our journey, to go on, and there's no reason why we should turn our backs on that.
I really agree with that, and I just feel that so hard because I wish that like I'll speak about it a lot because it's something that really is deep to me. My grandparents' death.
Mhm.
Um, when especially my maternal grandparents, they ended up being in like a home facility for their last few years. And I hadn't really started a lot of my like spiritual healing work and things like that. And the old folks home or whatever, uh, it sat a lot of fear in me, and I didn't go visit them nearly as often as I should have. I had every opportunity and I chose not to. Um, and I know that they don't hold that against me now because they're here with me now. I feel them all the time.
Absolutely.
But if I had done this reconciling with death that of where I am now, I could have gone and asked them things about their lives while they still remembered. And like I just it frustrates me. I'm gonna
Mhm.
say that a lot because it really does that I missed out on a lot of their death process and giving them the grace of dying a good death. I listened to
Absolutely.
another podcast, The Southern Fried Witch, with Seba Okiley, and she talks a lot about that, about dying a good death. And that is
Absolutely.
something that it hits me in my heart like a gong that's what I want. I don't want to be so fearful of death that I don't think about it and live this small, tiny life. I want to make sure that with every day and every step that I'm taking through that, I'm making sure that I'm dying a good death. Even now, like hopefully I live a good long life and don't die until, whatever, 70, 80, 90, whatever. So there's a
Right.
lot of life that hopefully I have left to live, but we got to live a good life. And I think that ignoring death and the inevitability of it, it really does a disservice to how we live a good death.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's all part of the same journey. You can't
Mhm.
compartmentalize it. It's all part
You
of the same
cannot.
beautiful journey.
Right,
And
right.
and a lot of the perceptions, we have of death these days is fear-based. It's really just
Mm.
fear-based. And and as death doulas, that's another thing that we do. We try to reach out through education and things like that to promote this, and I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly this time, death positivity. Positivity. uh,
What so as a death doula, what do you find from like people who are personally going through the death process? What's like the most common question that they ask?
the most common question they ask, they usually don't, by that time, by the time of end of death, there aren't very many questions.
Hmm.
Um, they've, believe it or not, they tend to have gone through it, especially if they're, as somebody who's dealt with a prolonged illness or
Mhm.
just old age. They know when their time is coming, and
Mhm.
they really, they're more concerned about their loved ones and the people that they're leaving behind. And this brings up an interesting story. Um, this one lady, uh, a beautiful woman, and it was her time, and she was ready to transition, but she held on for the longest time because one of her daughters was having some emotional issues surrounding her transition, and she was a little, having some problems, and so the mom was so worried about her that she just um, would not go, and we had to convince her that her daughter and her other daughters would be taking care of that one daughter, and
Mm.
looking after her and making sure that everything was going to be okay. And once the mom knew that, she left. Um,
Mm.
so that's usually, the biggest thing on people's minds at end of life are their loved ones that they're leaving behind or their pets. Um, that's usually their biggest concern.
Mm. So do you do more work with the dying person or with the family member, or is it kind of an equal way of both?
Well,
Like, do you continue to work with the family after the person has passed on?
yes, yes, we
Okay.
do. We do bereavement and grief work with them afterwards. We help with funeral planning, and that sort of thing. So yes, we do continue on after the person has transitioned. But for the most part, we kind of focus before that. Of course, we're focusing on the individual that's in the process of dying. We do offer support to the family members as well, but it's mostly focused on that individual. And then once that process has occurred, then we kind of refocus ourselves onto the family members.
Fascinating, fascinating. I realized as I was asking that question that I had never kind of asked you about the whole process of it. What point do you normally get involved in the process, or is it kind of different for everybody? Like once they realize that you and people, people like you are out there.
It's different for everybody. We don't always get the luxury of working, for a while with people towards the end of life. Sometimes you're not called in until the very last minute.
Hmm.
Um, so it just depends. Hopefully, though, that will change as the role of a death doula becomes more and more common.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, but it just really depends.
Mhm, mhm. I found it fascinating as I was starting to tell people, that this is an interview that was coming up, and I was really looking forward to it. Um, Doula is a word that people associate so commonly now with birth.
Right.
Everybody knows what a birth doula is, and so I found it fascinating that when I would tell people that I was interviewing a death doula, that they would be like, "Well, what is that?" And I'm like, "Well, you know what a birth doula is, right?" And they're
Hmm.
like, "Well, yeah." And I'm like, "Well, it's the same thing, but for the other side of life, for
Right.
why, if we have a process where we have people who help assist us in the life giving, why wouldn't we have someone assist us on the other end?" And like, it's just so funny because, we're coming up on the Easter season and it's spring and people are talking about life and all
Hmm.
this and new and why, but nobody talks about the other side. Nobody talks about the winter of life.
Exactly.
And I'm so grateful to have people like you here to help guide us through that, because in working in the animal field, like, I've got a really very close personal relationship with death. um
Absolutely.
Working in the emergency field, I've done the math on it over the years, and it's thousands of animals that I have helped
Hmm.
in that process to cross over. um and there's been a lot of people who don't want to stay in an
Right.
end of life situation for an animal, which I understand because, as I've said, I've done this for a very long time. Um, but seeing others, because like I obviously have a high reverence for death and the death process and the handling of the body after and things like that. Um, there are a lot of people who it either affects really deeply or they're strangely like blasé about it. And it's like I've said, it's frustrating for the lack of respect that people have on the other end of it because they just don't wanna fucking talk about it. And
Right.
so we're just gonna continue talking about it. What's the biggest thing that you wish for people? So we always ask people, "What are your magical aspirations?" So that's gonna be a two-folded question. I wanna know what your personal magical aspirations are, but also as a death doula, what is your death doula magical
Well,
aspirations?
okay, so my personal magical aspirations is simply just to be of service to others, however I may be called to do that, however that may
Hmm.
look, whether it's just holding space for somebody and listening to them kind of verbally work out whatever challenges they're having at the time, and
Mm.
just offering my presence, or holding hand at the end of life, anything and everything in between. However, I am called
Mhm.
to be of service to others is part of my personal magical aspirations. As far as a death doula is concerned, it really helping whomever I have the honor of serving at the end of life
Mm.
to help them have the most beautiful transition possible.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so beautiful, Lori. I've gotten the pleasure of speaking with you many times, and your purpose of just wanting to be of service to others is just so wonderfully evident. You're just one of the most kind people
Thank
that I
you.
have ever met. I will tell a little personal story
Absolutely.
also of how Lori helped through that situation. A friend of mine was very recently affected by a close personal friend's suicide. And she's not a very spiritual person, but she knows that I am. So she always listens to me talk about my woo woo stuff. And she respects it and she's really wonderful. And when this tragedy happened, I kind of asked her a couple of like woo woo type questions, like, do you want to we can try to maybe like spiritually cleanse the house because it was not a good situation. Do you want to go to the Mississippi River and we can throw flowers and kind of just like talk about the whole situation? And she very surprisingly said yes. And Becky, Reverend Raven, and Lori and I and she, we all went to the river. And we got to have this really beautiful goodbye ceremony in a situation where
Mhm.
she didn't get to say goodbye like she really would have wanted to. Um, and she and I spoke about that after we were done. And her gratitude for that was, I would have never, I was really surprised and touched by it. That I was able to help kind of facilitate part of her grieving process. And I imagine that's what you must go through as a death doula all the time, to be able to be someone who is so comfortable with death and to talk about it all the time.
Mhm.
Um, it's a really good feeling to be able to help people move through it, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about as well is just good grief in general. And I cannot take credit for that. That's also from an episode of the Southern Fried Witch. She talks about that very frequently.
Right.
But I decided to Google good grief just to see kind of what came up around it. And it says good grief includes traveling through the grief cycle without getting stuck or stalled, embracing the messiness and the range of emotions during loss and recovery, leaning into the pain and loss, and learning more about yourself and others. And
Right
that
on.
struck a lot of, yeah, that
Right
really struck a
on.
lot of
That's yep.
very big chords for me. And I imagine you see this all the time, people getting stuck in the grief cycle.
Absolutely. And that usually happens when, with fear. I mean, fear is a big thing that gets a lot of people stuck in a lot of situations.
Mm,
But in essence, we are each one of us is a death doula.
mm,
Really, we have that ability to hold space for people, and you would be surprised the power simply of your presence.
mm,
We underestimate the power of our presence. You don't
mm,
have to do anything. You don't have to say anything.
mm,
Just being there for someone,
mm,
and letting them know that they are not alone and that they are, um, and that everything is, they're grieving exactly the way that they're supposed to be grieving. There is no right, there
mhm,
is no wrong, there is no bad, there is no good.
mhm,
It's just a process. That's all it is. And it's one of those processes that isn't linear. It's kind of like I have a meme actually that I was looking at the other day, and it's all over the place. So you'll go from one thing to being angry to being sad to be, and back and forth and around, and it's all okay.
mhm.
It's what's comes up for you. And I think people just need to really be supported in that and know that there is no right and wrong, there is no good and bad. It is just
Right.
what it is.
It is what it is, because there's not one single one of us who is going to escape it.
Nope.
And I think that always manages to be the thing that astounds me the most. You can take care of your vessel and all of that as well. as well as anybody or whatever, you might live to be 100 and 120 and
Mhm.
whatever, people are living longer every day in today's world. Um, but it's still going to end at some point. And we just do such a disservice when we don't honor that. And like so another personal story for me is this past week. One of my dogs, he had to have a pretty major surgery. He's a 13-year-old gentleman, so he is no young buck, but he's been very healthy up until now. And this has been a really fascinating process for me, especially knowing that we were coming up on recording this episode.
Right, right.
But it really made me face, his mortality. And it really also made me check myself because, like I said, this is a hill that I will stand on and I will die upon it about in our field, we get the grace of letting them come on, words, form yourself, of letting them die with dignity.
Mhm,
We don't have to watch our animals, suffer and wither. We can help take some of their pain away.
mhm.
And I have joked for a very long time because I'm a very morbid person about like, I'm a little scared that I'm probably going to euthanize them a little bit too early because I do not want them to be in any pain at all. So like
Right.
knowing that I was going into this surgery with him, it made me think about all of the options. I thought about every possible thing that could happen. I thought about him being perfectly fine. I thought about something going wrong. I thought about not seeing him again, and
Right.
that was there were some people who made me feel, I guess, a little crazy as to why I would even be thinking of the bad options. I worked in emergency medicine for 10 years. There is
Mhm.
no way to not think about the bad options. And not for like the point of like talking about my fear, but about talking about preparedness. I
Well,
have been on the non-family side of an animal on a major surgery, something going wrong in that moment and having to make calling owners and making snap decisions,
mhm,
and they're not prepared for them at all. And like it's a
exactly.
moment where like you've got about 10 seconds that you need to make a decision because we're in a life or death situation now. And I was prepared for all of those things and I was really grateful for all of the training and all of the experiences I had because no matter what, I was prepared and I was ready to make whatever decision I needed to make. Surprisingly enough, the outcome that I think I was the least prepared for was the good one.
Right.
you
Well,
know?
I mean,
Um,
that brings up a couple of things really. And, first of all, there seems to be this sort of common perception that if we talk about it and we think about it, it's going to happen, right?
right,
So if we're putting that, oh, if we think about, my pet passing away during surgery, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But
right,
in actuality, death is not avoidable,
right.
and so it's all about controlling what you can control
Mm,
and kind of sort of leaving the rest up to the universe, really. And we can't control our, and when our time comes, we know that it's going to come, and we can't control that. So what can we control? We can
right.
control all these other things surrounding it, having plans of action, sitting down and just maybe journaling or writing, what would your end of life, what do you want that to look like?
Mm,
What does your vigil look like to you? Do you want to
mhm.
have music in the background? What kind of lighting would you like? Would you like some aromatherapy? What kind of scents do you prefer? What would you
Mm.
like to wear?
Right,
That sort of
right.
thing. I mean, it's really, it sounds funny, but it's like you can plan it out to the detail.
Right.
There was one lady who wanted a certain hand lotion,
Mm.
because it reminded her of her grandmother, you know? And
Mm.
I'm like, right on. We can do that. That's something we can control here. We can totally do
Right.
that.
And that I love that. I'm an Aries, so I love to control things. So I'm super into
Yeah,
that.
but I mean, there's no point in putting energy into stuff we can't control. So rather, why don't we just make it the most beautiful we can by controlling what we can? There
Right.
is a lot that we can control, and that's one of them. What do you want your end of life to look like? What do you
Right.
want to happen if an emergency happens?
Right,
Where would
right.
you like your pets to go? What would you like to happen with your pets? What would your estate, your affairs, how do you want things handled? You can control
Right.
all that.
And that leads me to my next question. You posted something, I don't know how long, it might have been just this week or last week. I don't know, time's weird. About alternative options for after.
Oh
I'm saying
yeah.
this to the entire public because I do not want this. If someone embalms me after I die, I'm going to be real pissed off. Okay.
Right
I will
on.
haunt you, whoever makes that decision. Let's talk about some different options that people have for after, because I've toyed around with whether, maybe just being buried as a non-embalmed person, maybe
Mhm.
being cremated. You posted something about being turned into a tree in the afterlife.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's some exciting new options that are becoming available. They're not widely available right now, but it is exciting stuff. So, first of all, I mean, let's talk about embalming, shall we, for just a moment? Let's
Yes.
let's get rid of the
Yes.
elephant in the room. All right, it's toxic, people, and who are you preserving yourself for? You're
Right.
gonna be in the
Right.
ground, and
And
then all that
every
toxicity
almost
goes into the ground. So
Right. And every embalmed person that I've ever seen in a wake, I've never walked up to any of
right,
them and said, "Oh, you look exactly like how I
right,
remember you."
right.
And then you're left with this memory of this, like, you know,
And
you know.
Annalise, you know what's crazy? What the really crazy thing about that is that most people are led to believe that embalming is a legal thing you have to do.
I am going on 33 years old, and I just recently found that out. Isn't that astounding?
Exactly. So, ding, 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 funeral industry. You do not have to pay $15,000 for a funeral. Okay, that's just
It's a
yeah,
myth.
yeah. It is not. There are a couple of instances in which embalming is it is required, but those are few and far between. That would be in cases in which you're transporting perhaps a body across state lines, and it varies from state to state. However, in general, embalming is not legal, and you can also people don't realize that keeping the body at home is also legal.
Mm,
Sometimes some states only require refrigeration, and
mhm,
and by refrigeration that could mean ice packs.
mhm,
So that brings us into the whole home wake thing, and getting back to doing things the way they used to do it before embalming. Embalming kind of came up during the Civil War. It became the
mm.
thing during the Civil War because they wanted to ship soldiers back home. And of course, back in the day, we didn't have airplanes and things like that. So it took a good long time to get from, point A to point B. So that's
Right.
where embalming came up. But it's not necessary up until that point. For thousands of years, people weren't embalmed. They did home wakes, home funerals. They tended to the body in the home after the death. And so it's kind of coming circle. We're kind of getting back to that. Um, and plus, it's better for the environment. So
Mm.
down that rabbit hole again. But I told there were some rabbit holes we could go down. But so some of the options that are becoming available, my favorite actually. Well, I don't know if I had to choose one, but one of them that's interesting is called a process called alkaline hydrolysis, and that's in essence
Oh,
using kind of water and lye to speed up the natural process of decomposition. So it's completely organic, completely natural. It's just speeding up
that's
that
so
natural process.
fascinating.
And what you have left over is bone matter that's treated just as if you had been cremated, and
Hmm.
the cremains are returned back to the family. But anything waste wise is completely can go into the down the drain. It's completely
Huh.
safe and non-toxic. Yeah.
That
Um,
is very, I had no idea.
and the whole thing about that is like people get a little squeamish about it because
Hmm.
because of the process when they start to think
Right.
about the process of what's happening. to their deceased loved one. But you have to think back too that when cremation came about, that was also like people were like, oh no, we can't do that. We can't desecrate the
Right.
body in such a way, even though Vikings were burning and Buddhists and people like that were burning bodies way before that. But anyway,
For centuries before.
yes,
Right.
yes, yes. So all of a
Right.
sudden, cremation was not a good thing. But then we kind of worked through that, right?
Right.
And
It's very
accepted it as
commonplace
okay.
now.
But so this is kind of one of those up and coming things that, and actually, it's very in places like Seattle and things like that. It's very common for pets, and they've been doing it with animals for a very long time because it's efficient, it's non, it's eco friendly, and that takes a process of decomposition that takes days, weeks, you know, and condenses it down into a few hours. So there's
Hmm.
actually a place in Seattle that strictly does alkaline hydrolysis for your pets, and it's a cleaner facility. It's just the clients can come and watch the process.
Oh, fascinating.
I think it's a better alternative, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. Is that, do you know how, what you will be done with you after you have moved on? Have you decided yet?
Yes, I have actually, and you're gonna oh you're gonna be like, oh my, when I tell you, but I'm all for the Tibetan sky burial.
What is that? I don't know if I'm familiar with that.
Tibetan sky burial is where they take your body and they lay you on a mountainside, and let the birds of prey come in, or the buzzards and things like that, pick you apart and take you off.
Uh, that's fucking dope. As I'm sitting here, I'm watching all the birds flying around in my
Mhm.
backyard right now. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's
Tibetan
awesome.
sky burial. That's
I I would expect nothing less from a death doula, truthfully. That answer met my expectations
awesome.
100%.
Yeah, I can't just say that to anybody. So anybody who listens to this is just gonna probably look at me sideways from now on, but
If
that's
they
okay.
well, if they've gotten this far into the episode, then we're good, we're good. They're definitely of our
Awesome.
kin for sure.
Right on.
Yeah. Okay, on a little bit of I guess a lighter note, if you will.
Mhm.
We've talked before asking some of our interviewees about, like, what's the thing that you're studying right now that's, like, really got your fire lit up?
Oh my. I have a couple irons in the fire, but
Yes.
so I'm going to be doing a near death experience workshop with a colleague of mine next month. And so I have some specialized training in near death experiences. I have personal experience with near death experience. So we're going to be doing a workshop surrounding, just kind of educating people. What is a near death experience? How does it differ from a full transition? What happens energetically, physically, and some of the after effects that come about after such an experience, and how to kind of navigate with greater ease afterwards. Some of the
Oh.
things that you're experiencing. So I've been kind of digging pretty deep into that, and yeah, it's that's yeah.
Once again, that's fucking dope, and I'm not even gonna ask you any questions about that because
Oh
we're gonna
yeah,
go
that's
ahead and have a whole episode about that.
oh absolutely right on.
Oh my god, that's so cool. Is that what led you into wanting to be a death doula? I guess I never asked that
Well,
question. Like, what was the
actually, it,
catalyst to be like, "I'm gonna do this"?
well, actually, I've kind of done it all my life. I've always sat beds. I was always the one who ended up sitting bedside with people,
Mhm.
and being the one that didn't have issues with interacting with people when they were transitioning. I was always very comfortable with it, and it seemed something that was very natural, that my soul was just called to do. Um, so even that was years, and I didn't find out that the death doula thing was actually a thing until a couple years ago. And when I saw that you could actually do that for a living, um, I was like, ding, 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 obviously. So yeah, and I've also worked in the veterinary field as well as a technician, so I get 100% what you say about
Mhm.
pets at the end of life as well, and they go through the same process that we do. And
Mhm.
And so I've been assisting them as well. So,
Yeah, and I guess through this whole interview, that's been dawning on me, and I can't believe it's never really dawned on me before that I guess I've also been a death
yep.
doula for a really long time because I have always been really, I guess, I don't know, it's will be weird to hear, but it's not weird to say, like, I've always been really honored to be a part of that process.
Absolutely.
For the people, like, for example, the people who can't stay because they have their own issues with death, with whatever, that's your journey.
Hmm.
But when they look me in the eye and they at least say, like, "Will you stay with them?" I'm
Hmm.
like, "Oh my god, of course." Like, I would not rather do anything else than stay with them, you
Right.
know? It's my true pleasure to be able to look at them and just say, "Whatever's going on, it's gonna be okay. I'm holding you. I'm here for you. You're not alone." Um, and then in the after their soul has passed on, to be able to treat the body with respect is a big and has
Absolutely.
always been a very big deal for me.
Absolutely. And when you're dealing with people, especially, as a death doula, you're kind of walking into situations that have so many years of history that you know nothing about.
Mm,
So what are these
right,
what is the family dynamic? What are the relationships amongst these people? And so
right.
you really have to be able to hold that compassion for them. And
Mm,
and I felt the same way about clients who couldn't stay for their pets. But you know what, Annalisa, you know, we had the luxury of being able to be there for them because we didn't
mhm,
have those emotional issues that some of those people have. So,
right,
and we have to be able to hold the compassion for them as well,
right,
because they're dealing with things that we know nothing about.
mhm.
And it's really important to hold space without judgment, and hold that compassion
Yeah,
for people, regardless of whether or not we think it's right or wrong, or you know
right.
um,
Well, and to hold space for people to have their own grief in whatever way they are.
exactly.
After being involved in this field for maybe about halfway through, um, I stopped crying at all of the end of life experiences, and I kind of realized that because it's not about my emotions in this. And like people
Mhm.
think I'm like outsiders to the situation. Like when they ask me, they're like, "Oh my God, do you just like cry all the time?" Sometimes, because some of them, obviously, I'm not a robot.
Right,
Um, but it's not about how I feel about the situation because I'm just a wallflower in that situation.
right,
I'm holding space for whoever needs to be held, whether it's holding that animal while their person can't be there or just placing your hand on the sobbing person's shoulder, but
mhm.
not taking their grief away from them.
Exactly, exactly. It's just about honoring the process and realizing that it isn't about us at all. It's not
Yeah,
about us at all.
right. And we're getting kind of towards the end here. And you can't talk about life and death without the afterlife.
Mhm.
I didn't know whether I was going to go into this or not. It was going to kind of depend on whether we had time. But I'm feeling really pushed to talk about it. What is your opinion of the afterlife?
Oh, dear. Oh,
Not
dear.
to put you on blast on an unprepared question, but
Oh, well, it's not that it's an unprepared question, it's just kind of a vast thing. I don't know if we have enough time to get into all that, but basically,
yeah, just if you could sum that up in like 10
yeah,
minutes.
let me give you the cliff notes on that, shall I? But I do believe that, I believe in energy. We're all energy. We're energetic beings, having a physical experience. So, and that's what connects us all, is that inner divine, source energy in all of us. So when one of us, transitions from the physical world, I believe that we reunite, um, to the energetic whole of the universe. Is that
Mm.
simple enough? I mean, it's kind of like I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, and it's really not that simple. But yeah, I do believe that we just kind of unite back into the energy of the universe.
I love
So,
that.
you know, really by honoring people at the end of life, we're honoring the parts of them that are in us. We're honoring
Mm,
ourselves by honoring others at the end of life, you know? So it's
mm,
kind of like
mhm,
that, um, you know, that the whole namaste, you know, that I honor the parts of you and you, and, you know,
mhm.
so yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. I really do, 'cause I feel the same way. I don't think that it's certainly not over once it's over, and
Mm-mm.
I've realized how much I really believe that in my journey just with death in general.
Absolutely.
Um, Now granted, I'm a person who I've never had a near death experience, and I've never personally been that close to death, so I guess I can't speak on how I will feel in that situation, but I've been next to it a lot.
Mhm.
And I feel like I know it's definitely not over. So that makes looking at death a
Right,
lot easier. And
right.
I feel like it takes a little bit of the pressure off, like to know that like
We
whatever this
continue on.
simulation that we're living right now, that like
The Matrix,
it
yeah.
matters because we're living it, but it doesn't really matter because I
Right.
believe that there's this bigger energy that we go back to at
Absolutely.
the end. And I
Absolutely.
also believe that all of my ancestors and the pets that have passed on, I think they're all standing in this room right now with me. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are
oh,
just we
well,
are all connected. We are all one. So, yeah. So that's why it
Lori,
is
this has
important to
been
honor.
it really is. It really is. And to honor, like we've been talking about, just to honor the process. And we do life so much justice by
Mhm.
honoring death and
And
looking
our
at it and talking
ancestors
about
knew
it.
that. Our ancestors knew
And
that. I
they
mean,
knew
look
that.
back at
They
ancient
really did.
funerary practices and how it's a
Right.
celebration. It's something to it's just as important as birth, as marriage.
Right.
Um,
Right.
you know, come on, you know?
And it seems so obvious to me, so I really, really challenge people to look death in the face in whatever ways you can. Don't be getting crazy now, all right, everyone? But, like, for honor the people in your life who are getting towards the end of theirs, ask them their questions, treat them about adults. I'm gonna talk about it again, the Southern Fried Witch, she's awesome, we're gonna interview her.
Awesome.
But she was talking about in an episode that I was listening to yesterday about, how when elderly people start to get old, all of a sudden we start treating them like they're children again, and like we stop
No.
talking about like risque things and like sex and like whatever, like they haven't fucking done it,
Right, right.
like,
I mean, the
and we
stories they could
do
tell you. I mean,
the
seriously?
stories they could tell if we just treated them like they were,
Right.
people who had just these, wells of knowledge, and we start to treat them as really fragile, and I think that that's sad, frankly.
Well, that's not holding them in the light that they are.
Right.
You know,
Right.
everybody that we come in contact with, we need to see them in the perfect divine light that they are.
Mm.
And that's whether they're young, old, healthy, living, transitioning, it matters not,
Mm.
because we're all perfectly divine light. So, and to think of somebody as anything less than that is not holding them in the light that they are.
I could not have said that any better. Any better. That is wonderful. And I think that's a good note to kind of start closing on. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to say to the magical people before we sign off?
Well, I mean, just, you know, don't wait until after somebody's gone to say all the good things about them and to tell them that you
Yeah.
love them and to remind them of the beauty and the lessons that they've brought into your life. Um, so
That
don't
you
wait
said it,
until they're
girl. You
gone.
said it. Don't wait until they're gone.
Don't
Definitely
wait
don't wait
until they're
until they're
gone.
gone. All right. Well, Lori, it was an honor and a pleasure to have this conversation. I
The
think
honor
we
was
covered
mine.
a
Thank you.
well, we will definitely I'm serious. We're going to have you back about that whole near death experience
Absolutely.
episode. So, start preparing yourself for that
Oh, right on.
cuz
Don't
we're
worry,
going
I'm
to
deep into it right now. So
oh good. That'll probably be a triple interview, so we'll all be coming at you hot.
it's a
Well,
series.
Yes. All right, listeners, I think that's all we've got for you today. I know this was probably a topic that if you got to the end of this, I'm really glad you did, because I think we covered a lot of really good things. And I think it's the perfect way to end our spiritual nutrition series, because what a better way to give nutrition to the soul than by figuring out the best way to honor your life. And that's by looking death in the face and saying, hey, look, I know that you're here and we're going to deal with that. And you're going to live this life with me. And I'm going to
Mhm.
walk to you gracefully at whatever point this is supposed to be over. So thank
Absolutely.
you for tuning in. And Lori, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Listeners, we'll see you next time. Y'all have a good one. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Magical Aspirations. We are coming at you every Tuesday with new content, so be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay up to date with the latest and the greatest from us here at Magical Aspirations, as well as little bonuses from Reverend Raven, Adriana, and I. Got a question or have a topic you want us to discuss? Email us at magicalaspirations@gmail.com. And leave us a review on your favorite listening platform so others can find us and join in on the Magical Aspirations conversation. Thank you again for tuning in, and as always, stay true to your magic.